Welcome to the Dora Penhaligon Mysteries by Leslie Knox. It is the year 1890, and in the quiet Devonshire village of Little Hatherley, life moves by the rhythm of the church bell, the gossip at the grocer's, and the steady ticking of time. But when that time begins to falter, when whispers turn to secrets and secrets to death, one woman will refuse to look away. Mrs. Isadora Penhaligon, widow, observer, reluctant detective. Together with Inspector Edmund Thorne of Exeter, she will uncover the hidden sins of the English countryside, where every smile hides a story and every clock marks the hour of truth. This is Book 1, The Sky is Falling, Chicken Little. The Sky is Falling, Chicken Little, a cozy historical mystery by Leslie Knox. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Cried Sky. Mrs. Isadora Penhaligon took her umbrella to choir practice because she disliked being surprised by the weather almost as much as by people. The former could be deflected by a firm silk canopy and stout ribs. The latter required civility, a light touch, and, occasionally, feigned deafness. On the evening in question, the clouds had piled above Little Hatherley in a range of sombre greys, and the west wind had the impatient slap of a child kept from cake. She tapped the umbrella's ivory tip twice upon the flagstone step, as if warning the elements she was prepared for them, then turned into the churchyard path. The lane beyond the lich gate smelled of damp stone and thyme, with a faint medicinal thread from Lydia Creech's apothecary around the corner. The swallows, who ordinarily kept a brisk, opinionated traffic above the church roof, skimmed low and silent, and the church itself, the modest, time-dented St. Mildred's, held its breath with the storm. On the tower, the weathercock creaked and revolved, an uncertain general surveying an uncommitted army. Inside, the choir was already working itself into the kind of harmony that made the treble boys squint and the altos purse. Mr. Kettle, the innkeeper, who sang a courageous bass as though he were pumping ale from a reluctant barrel, bobbed courteously at Dora's entrance. Lady Araminta Doveton, robed in an air of benign proprietorship, arranged her hymn book as a queen might arrange her sceptre. The vicar, the Reverend Basil Fenwick, fluttered his hands at the organist and murmured, very good," with the air of one who hoped to be believed. Dora shed her light shawl, tucked the umbrella beneath her chair, and slipped into her accustomed place among the contraltos. She had just turned 40 and had the kind of loveliness that is less a matter of features than of arrangement. Soft hair, arranged without fuss, eyes that preferred to listen, a mouth that knew where the end of a sentence lived and did not feel compelled to stroll past it. She had a small pearl pin at her throat, not showy but resolute like herself. "Dreadful sky," whispered Mrs. Emmet on her left, fanning her face with the programme. "Hurts my head to look at it." "Don't look at it, then," Dora said mildly. "Look at the notes. Mr. Kettle is threatening the D below middle C. It will require all our compassion." A roll of thunder answered them, thick as a cartload of coal tipping over in the lane. Several of the trebles glanced, guilty and delighted, towards the windows. "Once more from He sendeth the springs into the valleys," called the organist. "And if the heavens oblige us, we shall have thunder for the drum." They sang, and for a time music overruled weather and village and gossip, as music sometimes will. Dora loved the way sound braided people together who otherwise kept a prudent distance. Mr. Kettle's bass softened and found its place. Lady Araminta's mezzo lost its small, imperious edge and turned, surprisingly, to velvet. The vicar, who sang like a well-meaning kettle left just off the boil, beamed at everyone's improvement as if it were his own. They were halfway through a particularly brave amen when the church door banged open and Miss Prudence Featherby swept in like a warning. She stood in the aisle, hat askew, cheeks pink with wind and fervour, a small figure that nevertheless managed to occupy every inch of attention available. "The sky is falling," Miss Featherby declared, not loudly, but with such conviction that even the organ let its chord die startled. "Miss Featherby," the vicar said, as if summoning an angel and finding one's aunt instead. "Perhaps." "The sky is falling before Michaelmas," she said, striding forward, tall feather on her hat nodding in furious agreement. "You may laugh, Mr. Kettle. You may purse, Lady Doveton. But mark me." "What an odd thing to command," murmured Dora to Mrs. Emmet. "I thought one marked birds, not ladies." Miss Featherby halted in the very centre of the nave, turned about like a schoolmistress inspecting a row of sticky children, and added with a more domestic ferocity, "You may all call me Chicken Little, as if fowls were the only creatures consulted by Providence. But I know what I know." "What do you know, Miss Featherby?" Dora asked, because someone ought, and because Miss Featherby had the fragile, persecuted air of a person who lives in a house of pins and has grown used to sleeping upright. Miss Featherby's head came round, the grey eyes were bright as steel. "Mrs. Penhaligon," she said, granting Dora the dignity of her proper name, which she bestowed rarely and always on an audience. "You are sensible. You are the only woman I have ever known who can carry both a parasol and a conversation without striking anyone." "High praise," Dora said, amused. "What news does the sky bring you?" "It brings no news," Miss Featherby retorted. "It brings judgment." "See there." She pointed to the clerestory windows, where bruised clouds pressed like uncivil giants at the glass. "The weathercock's been pointing north all day and north again and back, and there's a mean wind from the east. That's a wind that doesn't merely come in. It paces the threshold and counts the plates." "The east wind does have a bookkeeper's soul," Dora conceded. "And I heard the bells talk," Miss Featherby continued, lowering her voice so that several persons leaned instinctively in. "They told me there will be a falling, not a trifling leaf, or the price of eggs. A falling that will bruise." "The bells told you?" Mr. Kettle said, unable to resist. "And what did they do for punctuation, Miss Featherby? Ring the changes?" Miss Featherby's thin mouth curved in contempt. "You'll hear them, Mr. Kettle, when they toll." She turned back to Dora. "Before Michaelmas," she said stubbornly. "I warned Constable Druitt, but men who wear buttons without polish never heed in time." The organist cleared his throat as one clears an unpleasant thought. The vicar said something about rain seeking low places and men seeking the nearest pint thereafter. Lady Araminta drew herself up like a swan, reconsidering a duck. Miss Featherby, abruptly dignified, dipped a stiff little curtsy to the altar and another to the congregation, and sailed out again on a fresh roll of thunder. "Well," breathed Mrs. Emmet, "if doom is coming, it won't have to knock twice. She'll throw the door open herself." "There was mud on the hem of her skirt," Dora said, almost to herself. "From the lane," Mrs. Emmet said. "From the green lane, yes," Dora said, "but higher, as if she'd taken the steeper path by the tower, where that old retaining wall never quite retains. It's nothing, of course." "Of course," Mrs. Emmet agreed, with the thrilled certainty of a woman who hoped it was not nothing at all. Rehearsal resumed, though with a conscientious lack of enthusiasm. One could sing through a storm, one could not sing through Miss Featherby. When practice concluded, Dora gathered her shawl and umbrella, accepted a smile from the vicar and a nod from Lady Araminta, and set out into the cool, wet dusk. The rain had begun with deliberation. Fat drops spaced like carefully chosen words. She opened the umbrella and held it low against the slanting wind, her steps quick on the glistening path. The village square had folded itself into evening, lamplighter's pole knocking lightly against glass, the butcher's boy pelting home, Mr. Kettle's windows leaking a friendly gold. Dora paused at the apothecary's door, which wore a sign as neat as Lydia Creech herself. Creech Pharmacy, tonics and tinctures. Injections by appointment. It was shut, of course, as sensible as a locked drawer. The air, however, kept its little thread of antiseptic, carbolic perhaps, and something lavender. By the time Dora turned into her lane, the rain had graduated from talk to action. She arrived at Rose Cottage with a damp hem and a sense, subtle as the scent of crushed mint, that Miss Featherby had not merely flapped into rehearsal to scold heaven. There had been a tremor under the scold, fear sharp as a pin. Nellie Fay opened the door before Dora could set her hand to the latch. "I thought you'd be caught," said Nellie, who was 19 and had the briskness of a sparrow and the eyes of a child who has discovered that the world, while alarming, is also abundantly amusing. "The sky cooperated by falling in a drizzle only," Dora said, stepping in, passing the umbrella and unwinding the shawl. "But you've laid a fire, as if you expected a tempest." "Cook says if you lay a fire for the worst, you get the best, ma'am," Nellie said, with the generous pride of a disciple. "There's pigeon pie in the oven, and Cook says the crust is as pious as a maiden aunt." "Then it will break at the wrong moment," Dora said, smiling. She sat where she liked best on such evenings, the little chair near the hearth where one could toast stockings discreetly between genteel visits. After supper she always wrote on storm evenings, an entry for the little column she contributed to the Ladies' Companion. It would be about the geography of tea trays and how habit formed a map more faithful than any surveyor. She did not write about Miss Featherby. Pigeons and tea trays belonged to a gentler nation. Miss Featherby required a harder pencil and a different paper, her small private diary, which she kept for the purposes of honesty and later, if needed, justice. Prudence Featherby came to rehearsals smelling of wet wool and grievance, she wrote, plain as a ledger. Pronounced that the sky would fall before Michaelmas. Mud on her skirt, tower path, tremor in the hand, left glove inside out. Angry with Mr. Kettle, I think, but that is not remarkable. Most ladies are. Said she had warned Constable Druitt. I believe she has heard something rather than imagined it whole. To ask Lydia in the morning whether Miss F. has been in for valerian. Her eyes had a shine I do not like. She paused, considered whether she had been uncharitable, and added, "Miss F. is not loved. It is a pity to be right too often in a small place. People prefer to be wrong together." She blew lightly on the ink and closed the diary. In the grate, the fire settled with the small, self-important sigh of a creature pleased with itself. The night passed in storm and drips and the muffled thudding of apples relinquishing their branches too soon. Towards morning, the wind grew bored and slunk away. The rain left off with a token patter, as a dowager at last dismisses a tedious caller. Dora woke at her usual hour, early, but with no virtuous pretensions to dawn. She liked the time when the village had gone almost quiet, when the milkman's clank and the first cart in the lane wrote the day's prologue. She dressed sensibly in a plain blue gown with buttons that did not pretend to be anything but buttons, pinned her hair, and took a light breakfast, while Nellie made enthusiastic weather reports and Cook muttered beatitudes over dough. The air that came through the kitchen window was washed and cool, flavoured faintly with smoke and damp grass, and the ghost of the night's tempest. Dora considered her list. Lydia first. The apothecary opened at 8:30, and then perhaps Mrs. Emmet, who, though a fearful gossip, had the instincts of a librarian and often put one's nose into the right chapter. She set out with her umbrella folded like a truce flag. The puddles in the lane wore small crownings of leaf and twig. In the square, the postmistress had already raised her blinds, eyeing the street with the managing glare of a general surveying raw troops. The church tower stood square and stone and seemingly untroubled by the night's theatrics. The weathercock, Dora glanced up, seemed to have taken the storm as a tonic. It gleamed, polished by rain. She had reached the churchyard gate when she saw Mr. Druitt, the constable, trotting across the grass with his hat pressed hard to his head, and a look that was not at all composed. Behind him came the vicar with his surplice thrown on any which way, like a man who had thought to dress for consolation and had been interrupted by reality. Two choir boys hovered with the solemn hysteria peculiar to their age, eyes wide, mouths bravely pursed, ready to become heroic witnesses at any moment. "Mrs. Penhaligon," the vicar cried, seeing her at the gate, if you would be so good." "I will be as good as I am able, Reverend Fenwick," Dora said, stepping inside, her heart knocking a little, not from exertion. "It's Miss Featherby," Mr. Druitt said, not meeting her eye. "Found by young Henry Greaves, taking the short path to the dairy. By the north wall where it dips. I think there's been—" He stopped and swallowed, an action of such bravery that Dora took a breath to steady her own sympathy. Mr. Druitt was a conscientious man who disliked any duty that made an unseemly noise in the world, such as death. "Take me to her," Dora said. They walked on wet grass that yielded small, cold breaths through her boots. The north side of the churchyard kept a pristinely Protestant gloom, which suited the view of the moor beyond and the economy of the stonecutter. The retaining wall, built in hopes, sagged along its middle like a tired belt. Beneath it, and a little out from its foot, lay Miss Prudence Featherby, her hat some feet off like a discarded opinion, and her body in the precise arrangement of someone who has fallen from a little height and been surprised by the ground. Dora knelt, because it was sometimes what one could do for a person no longer able to be embarrassed by one's knees. The face was not disfigured, only set in a kind of pale astonishment. The hair, stubbornly tidy even now, had freed a small grey curl at the temple. There was mud on the hem of the skirt, yes, and the left glove, inside out, weighted like an accusation on the grass by her side. Dora's eye, without excitement, took census. A livid bruise beneath the right ear. A smear at the collar where the pin had caught in the fall. The faintest suggestion of grit upon the palm that faced up, as if the hand had tried to catch the earth and found it, unhelpfully, already occupied. "She must have stumbled from the wall," Mr. Druitt said, in the tone of a man bargaining with fate for a simpler explanation. "The ground's soft. It might have given. The rain, Mrs. Penhaligon." "The wall has been quarrelling with gravity for years," Dora said very gently. "Miss Featherby would have known its moods." "And a stumble does not bruise so artfully. See, just there behind the ear." The vicar made a sound like a prayer that had lost its way. "I don't say accident," Mr. Druitt said, reddening. "Not yet, that is. Could be the fall did it, the edge of the stone. I'll fetch Dr. Hatherley." "You'll fetch him quickly," Dora said, looking not at Mr. Druitt but at Miss Featherby's face. It had already begun, that subtle rearrangement that is neither peace nor unrest, but the cessation of argument. The eyes, which had always looked as if they were about to spring on an unguarded truth and wring its neck, had closed. The mouth, that small lock of a mouth, had loosened. "Mrs. Penhaligon," the vicar murmured. "We saw her last night." "At choir," Dora said. "Yes, remember? She came in with a warning that the sky would fall before Michaelmas." The vicar shut his eyes. "Ah, yes." "And then," Dora added quietly, "the bells told her there would be a falling that would bruise." The vicar opened his eyes again, beseeching the world to be rational. "Bells do not pronounce," he said, as if stating such a thing could make it more true. "No," Dora said, "people do." The constable hurried off for the doctor. The choir boys were sent away with the solemnity of a state funeral and the promise of red currant buns if they kept their mouths shut, which ensured they would not. Dora remained for a moment at the side of the woman whose voice had so often been dismissed, and who lay now with the proof of something, she could not yet say what, upon her skin. She rose, brushed her gloves together as if dusting a small thought, and turned to the vicar. "I will help you with the sheet," she said. "Nellie will come from the cottage with a clean one, and we'll cover Miss Featherby decently until Dr. Hatherley comes." "You are very good," the vicar said with that helpless gratitude men sometimes feel towards competence. "No," Dora said, and the softness in her voice surprised even herself. "She is, or was, very unfortunate." Goodness is merely the habit of not leaving a person alone when one might be useful. As she walked to send Nellie, the morning felt very bright, as if the storm had polished it for clarity. The weathercock high above turned once and then held, its beak pointing steady as a finger. Somewhere out on the lane, a cart creaked and a man whistled, and life, imperturbable as a clerk, continued entering the day's transactions in its ledger. Before Michaelmas, Miss Featherby had said. The sky, she had said, would fall. Dora, who had known many skies, Mediterranean, yellow and tender, Egyptian, hard as enamel, English, temperate and puzzled, looked up. The sky stood where it generally did, cool and pale, inscrutable as a parson's sermon. It did not fall, but something had, and the bruise beneath Miss Featherby's ear was not an accident of weather. Dora collected her thoughts with the same economy with which she collected her shopping. First things first, and no superfluities. She sent Nellie with the sheet. She found the vicar a cup of tea strong enough to defend itself. She offered Mr. Druitt, when he returned with the doctor, a sentence free of embroidery. "There is a bruise behind the ear." And then, as Dr. Hatherley bent over the poor, rigid figure, and the morning began to draw curious faces to the churchyard gate like iron filings to a magnet, Dora Penhaligon did the most shocking thing of her day. She permitted herself to believe Miss Featherby might have been right. The sky, of course, remained politely in place, but truth, oh, truth had loosened a stone. And when one stone moved in Little Hatherley, others were inclined to follow. Chapter 2. Tea, Tinctures, and the Law. By mid-morning, Little Hatherley had worked itself into a state of solemn delight. Death, so long deferred to old age and feeble hearts, had appeared with a touch of drama, and that was an event not to be wasted. Curtains twitched as if stirred by a collective conscience, and the air about the square vibrated with the discreet buzz of conjecture. Mrs. Penhaligon, who had known grief enough to avoid gossip as one avoids a cold draught, carried her composure like a lantern through the village. She stopped first at the apothecary, as she had intended, even before the discovery by the wall. The small bell above Lydia Creech's door gave its particular tinkle, the sound of virtue being announced. Lydia emerged from the back room, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms both capable and powdered faintly with chalk. She was a lean woman of indeterminate age, possessed of that smooth, unyielding skin that seems polished by duty rather than youth. "Mrs. Penhaligon," she said, as if reading from a prescription. "A dreadful morning." "Indeed," said Dora, setting her gloves upon the counter. "And an early one for poor Miss Featherby." Lydia inclined her head with something like irritation rather than sorrow. "I had word already. Tom Gibbs came pounding at the door before 9 to tell me the sky had fallen, as he put it. He was weeping, though, mind you, Tom can cry over a broken horseshoe if it's his own work." "She came to see you yesterday, did she not?" Dora asked gently. "For valerian, perhaps?" "Valerian, yes, and laudanum, and a request for something to steady a beating heart. I told her her heart would beat until it stopped, and I could do nothing for prophecy." Lydia's mouth drew tight, but her eyes flickered uneasily. "I told her to rest and to mind her meals." She said there were matters brewing that would not let her rest. When I pressed, she laughed in a way I did not like. Thin laughter, like wind through wire. "She left anything behind?" Dora asked. A coin for the tincture and her good opinion of me, both small change. She did ask whether I stocked phosphorus, which I do not, except for laboratory use. For the rats, she said. I told her we had no rats, only people. She meant mischief then, Dora murmured, or thought she saw it. Lydia reached for a small jar as if to avoid her own discomfort. You've known her longer than I. Long enough, Dora said, to believe she could not leave this world without giving it a parting sermon. She was frightened, Lydia. Not of death, I think, but of something near to it. Lydia replaced the jar with precision. Everyone is frightened, Mrs. Penhaligon. We just prefer to call it caution. When Dora emerged again, the sun had fought its way through the thinning clouds, and the puddles had turned from pewter to silver. The church bell tolled once, respectful, restrained, to mark the doctor's confirmation that Miss Featherby was indeed beyond tincture or prayer. By noon, the vicarage was receiving callers, each determined to offer sympathy and extract details in the same breath. Dora, however, had other errands. She stopped at the post office to send a note to her cousin in Exeter, ordering more ink and, less obviously, time to think. Miss Primrose Keat, the postmistress, wore her mourning with an air of proprietorship. A tragedy, Miss Keat sighed, weighing the small packet as though it contained the sin of curiosity. And such a way to go. The Tower Path of all places. My brother says the footing's uncertain. So it seems, Dora said. Miss Keat's eyes gleamed. Dr. Hatherley says it wasn't all the fall, you know. Dora raised a brow. Indeed. A bruise, Miss Keat whispered, lowering her voice as if imparting scripture. Behind the ear. Quite distinct. He told Lady Doveton, and she told Mrs. Emmet, and Mrs. Emmet, well, you know she keeps a spiritual correspondence with the departed. Then we must wait until she hears Miss Featherby's account, Dora said dryly. It will save the constable the trouble of inquiry. Miss Keat looked disappointed that Dora refused to be more scandalised. And have you heard the latest? The inspector's coming down from London. Real Scotland Yard, they say. Imagine. Ah, Dora said thoughtfully. Then perhaps we shall have our thunder after all. Inspector Edmund Thorne arrived on the 3:15 train, accompanied by a small valise, a neatly folded overcoat, and an expression that suggested London had sent him to the country as an act of either mercy or punishment. He was in his middle 40s, spare and composed, with a faint mark of old injury about one eyebrow that lent him a permanent air of wry scepticism. Constable Druitt met him at the station with an air of deferential dread. It's a quiet place, sir, Druitt began. Mostly hens and hymns. Not much in the way of, well, murders. I'm glad to hear it, said Thorne. We'll endeavour to keep it that way. Now, where is the deceased? Vicar's vestry, sir. Till the coroner comes. Dr. Hatherley's made his note, says it could be accidental, but... Well, there's the bruise, sir. There's always the bruise, Thorne said absently and stepped into the hired trap. When they reached St. Mildred's, the afternoon light lay over the churchyard like cool linen. Dora was there. She had brought a posy from her garden and arranged it with quiet hands near the vestry door. It was, she thought, a small courtesy for a woman who had died with no one to mourn her. Thorne saw her before she turned. He registered the details that matter to men who make a living of observation. Posture balanced without stiffness, eyes that met his without demand, and the faintest scent of lavender and rain. He touched his hat. Mrs. Penhaligon, is it? I'm told you found Miss Featherby. Not found, Inspector. I arrived shortly after. Mr. Druitt found her first, or rather young Henry Greaves did. I merely observed. That can be the more useful role, Thorne said, not unkindly. May I ask what you observed? That she did not fall by chance, Dora said calmly. The bruise was deliberate. Her left glove was inside out, and her hat had blown off, yet the pin remained fastened. That argues a struggle before the fall. Thorne studied her a moment as one might a witness one did not intend to dismiss, but would prefer not to encourage too soon. You've an eye for detail. I was married to a naval officer, Dora said. One learns the difference between accident and misadventure. He inclined his head slightly amused. And do you have a theory as to motive? No, Inspector. But she believed the sky would fall. Perhaps someone feared she might be right. Thorne's mouth curved faintly, an expression halfway between respect and resignation. If you intend to assist my inquiry, Mrs. Penhaligon, I warn you, it can be tedious work. I'm quite accustomed to tedium, she said. I've lived in Little Hatherley for 5 years. That evening the village buzzed like a hive under smoke. At the Doveton Manor, Lady Araminta received guests for what she termed an impromptu consolation supper, a description that did not prevent her from wearing black velvet and diamonds. Dora was invited, naturally. One could not exclude Mrs. Penhaligon from village events without appearing ungracious, and besides, her presence lent proceedings a touch of refinement. The drawing-room smelled of roses and rivalry. Mr. Kettle discussed his knowledge of criminal nature, acquired through the reading of penny dreadfuls. Mrs. Emmet mourned that Miss Featherby had never learned to smile properly. Lydia Creech declined wine, citing headaches. The vicar said prayers that meandered so gently through the subject of mortality that no one quite noticed when he stopped. Inspector Thorne, persuaded to attend by Lady Araminta's imperious invitation, sat quietly near the fire. He said little but watched much. Dora, sipping her tea, recognised the habit. "Tell me, Mrs. Penhaligon," he said later, as the guests dispersed, "what did Miss Featherby mean when she said the sky would fall?" "She meant," said Dora, "that something terrible would happen. But she often said such things. The difference is that this time she was right." Was she a woman inclined to imagination? She was inclined to fear, Dora said softly, and fear is a more dangerous faculty. Thorne nodded, turning the idea over as one might a coin whose authenticity was still uncertain. And if fear killed her? Then someone else provided the reason, Dora said. No one dies in Little Hatherley without giving offence to at least 3 others. The question, Inspector, is which of them took her prophecy personally. Outside, the moon hung over the thatched roofs like a silver shilling someone had forgotten to put away. The air smelled of rain and secrets, and from the church tower, the weathercock turned once, east to west, with a slow metallic cry, as if marking the beginning of something neither wind nor man could quite control. Chapter 3. The Second Warning. The next morning dawned with that deceptive brightness England specialises in. Sunlight like good intentions, and a wind that meant to rain before tea. The village had already buried the previous day beneath layers of speculation thick enough to serve as insulation. Mrs. Penhaligon, with her small notebook and sharper intuition, walked to the churchyard again. The grass was still bruised where Miss Featherby had fallen. Someone had left a single posy of wilted daisies and a note folded into a triangle. Dora read it only because the wind, obligingly indiscreet, lifted the corner. "You were right, Miss P. We should have listened." No signature. And no courage, Dora thought, folding it back beneath the stems. At the lich gate she met Inspector Thorne, who had evidently been walking the grounds since early morning. His boots carried a respectable quantity of dew, and his manner the faint irritability of a man attempting to reason with English mud. "Good morning, Mrs. Penhaligon." He touched his hat. "I see the village wakes early to tragedy." "The village would wake early to a sneeze," Dora said, smiling. "But tragedy has better conversation value." He smiled briefly. "I've spoken with the doctor." He confirms your observation. The bruise could not have been made by the fall alone. Likely a blow with something rounded. A walking stick, perhaps. No defensive wounds. She didn't expect it. Few of us do, Dora murmured. Thorne walked a few paces with her, studying the slope of the wall and the narrow path above. She came this way deliberately. Someone met her, or followed her. Miss Featherby met very few people deliberately, Dora said. Most arrived by accident and stayed out of politeness. He glanced at her sidelong. And yet, she frightened someone enough to kill her. By mid-afternoon, the rhythm of village life resumed with hypocritical briskness. The grocer stacked apples as if equilibrium could be restored by symmetry. Mrs. Emmett's laundry flapped with anxious vigour. Only Lydia Creech's shop remained shuttered, an omission everyone noticed but no one addressed aloud. Dora saw it as she passed and felt the same small unease she'd known at Miss Featherby's inside-out glove. Lydia was punctual to the minute and prided herself on opening even when influenza had her by the throat. The closed door stood out like a blot on a neat page. At 4:30, Nellie came running into Rose Cottage, cheeks flushed from the wind. "Mrs. Penhaligon, cook says they've sent for the doctor again." At the apothecary's. Dora's teacup paused mid-air. "Lydia Creech?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Kettle says she's taken poison, or maybe fainted into it." "Fainting into poison seems improbable," Dora said, rising and reaching for her shawl. "Fetch my gloves." The apothecary was thick with the smell of carbolic and something sweeter beneath. Bitter almonds. Dora knew that scent. She had once watched a ship's surgeon mix laudanum for a wounded sailor. Cyanide left a similar ghost in the air, clean and merciless. Dr. Hatherley stood by the counter, his spectacles sliding mournfully down his nose. Lydia lay on the floor, as tidy in death as she had been in life, her hair pinned and her skirts straightened. Beside her, an overturned bottle leaked its sharp perfume into the boards. Inspector Thorne looked up from his notes as Dora entered. "You have good timing, Mrs. Penhaligon." "Another of your acquaintances." "Acquaintance, yes. Friendship requires softer edges than Lydia possessed." "Dr. Hatherley believes she ingested potassium cyanide," Thorne said quietly. "The bottle's labelled for photographic use, but her hands show traces." "And this?" He lifted a slip of paper sealed with ink. "I am tired of suspicions. Signed, L.C." "Ah," said Dora. "How convenient of her to provide initials. The dead seldom have such tidy penmanship." Thorne's brows rose. "You think it false?" "I think Lydia Creech would not misspell the word suspicious," Dora said. She was precise, to a fault, and she disliked endings. The inspector regarded her with renewed interest. "Then someone wishes to close the matter quickly." "Someone who reads too many penny novels," Dora said dryly. "Suicide notes are such obliging inventions." He folded the slip carefully. "And what motive would our hypothetical murderer assign her? Guilt over Miss Featherby's death?" "Perhaps," Dora said, glancing about the room. "Or perhaps she knew what Miss Featherby feared." That evening the rain returned, as if to wash the village clean of evidence. Dora sat by the hearth, her diary open and her thoughts scattered like crumbs for sparrows. Nellie brought tea and hovered, clearly bursting with news. "They say Miss Creech was seen with Tom Gibbs 2 nights ago," Nellie said. "Outside the forge after hours." "Do they indeed?" "Cook says he was sweet on her once, but she turned him down because she said love spoiled the hands." "Then poor Lydia died with immaculate hands," Dora said softly. "Do you think it's the same person what killed Miss Featherby, ma'am?" "I think," Dora said, "that coincidences breed faster than rabbits in this village. 2 deaths tied by gossip, fear, and perhaps a single secret. But we mustn't speculate before pudding." "Pudding's treacle, ma'am," Nellie said, comforted. "Then even grief has its mercy," Dora said. The next morning brought Inspector Thorne to Rose Cottage. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his manner composed but curious. "I've come," he said, "to borrow your mind." "Most men borrow sugar," Dora said, "but very well." He sat opposite her in the parlour, where the light softened even the severity of officialdom. "You were right about the note. The ink doesn't match her bottles. Someone brought it in. Then you've confirmed it wasn't suicide." "I've confirmed it was staged," Thorne said, "but I've yet to prove by whom. I keep circling the same few names, Tom Gibbs, Lady Doveton, the vicar even, but motive remains slippery." "Perhaps you're searching for a single motive," Dora said, "but people rarely kill for one reason. They kill for a collection. Fear, pride, a grievance left too long in the drawer." He smiled faintly. "And which of our villagers keeps such a drawer?" "All of them," Dora said. "The question is, who found it convenient to open Miss Featherby's first?" Thorne looked thoughtful. "You've an uncommon gift for inference." "I've an uncommon amount of leisure," Dora replied, "and a fondness for truth, however impolite." He rose, putting on his hat. "Then perhaps, Mrs. Penhaligon, you'd do me the honour of accompanying me tomorrow to the Doveton fete. Lady Araminta insists it proceed despite the deaths. She claims to do so in the spirit of village morale." "Ah, yes," Dora said, lips curving. "Nothing restores morale like cucumber sandwiches under a shadow of murder." "I rather thought you'd agree." When he had gone, Dora crossed to her writing desk and opened her diary once more. Second death, Lydia Creech. Bitter almonds. The note a forgery. Inspector Thorne cautious but intelligent. 2 women dead who both feared something. The village growing restless. Lady Doveton too insistent upon calm. And Miss Featherby's words linger. "Before Michaelmas." She paused, listening to the patter of rain upon the glass, and wrote one last line. "The sky has not yet fallen, but it is leaning." Chapter 4, The Doveton Fete. By the time the Doveton Fete arrived, Little Hatherley had dusted itself with cheer like icing sugar on a questionable cake. The bunting flapped bravely against a sky that still looked undecided about its mood, and the air smelled of strawberries, hay, and something faintly metallic. Perhaps anticipation. Mrs. Isadora Penhaligon, dressed with the discreet elegance of a woman who knew she was being observed and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Her gown, of soft lavender lawn, cinched neatly at the waist, hinting at the hourglass figure that time and temperance had preserved. Her hair, still abundantly fair though threaded with silver, was coiled in a loose knot that suggested both discipline and surrender. There was something fetching about her in the old-fashioned sense of the word, a charm that drew the eye without demanding its stay. Men looked at her as they might a familiar melody, played unexpectedly well. Even the women of Little Hatherley, prone to comparison as a pastime, had ceased describing her as well-preserved, and instead sighed that she wore her years beautifully. When Dora stepped into the garden of Doveton Manor, heads turned as naturally as flowers toward light. "Mrs. Penhaligon," Lady Araminta called from beneath a white parasol the size of a smaller pinion. "You bring refinement wherever you go. Do sit near the tea urn. Your presence will improve the tone." "I should not wish to deprive the urn of its duties," Dora said pleasantly, though she accepted the seat. From it she had a perfect view of the green, where villagers circled the tombola, gossiped over sponge cakes, and pretended not to notice the police constable discreetly inspecting every hedge for clues. Inspector Thorne arrived a few minutes later, dressed more respectably than comfortably in a dark suit that managed to look both official and faintly apologetic. Dora saw him glance once at her before redirecting his attention to the balloon demonstration near the lake. The inventor, a gentleman from Bath with impressive whiskers and an unwise enthusiasm for gas, was preparing to send aloft a small silk sphere painted with cherubs and optimism. "Inspector," Dora greeted him, rising. "You've come to admire science or sandwiches?" "Whichever proves less dangerous," he said. "Though given recent events, I'd wager on neither." "Then stay near me," Dora said lightly. "I have a steadying influence." "I have noticed," he replied, and the corner of his mouth curved. The fete unfolded with the usual blend of competition and confection. Mrs. Emmett's jam won third place on the strength of her gossip alone. Tom Gibbs managed to win the hammer throw, but lost the respect of half the ladies when he swore audibly at a splinter. Dora moved through it all like the calm eye of a storm, collecting fragments of conversation as deftly as one gathers petals for potpourri. Lady Doveton was overheard telling the vicar that Lydia Creech had been a useful woman but too clever by half. Mr. Kettle muttered to anyone with ears that Miss Featherby's fall had been a warning from Providence against nosiness. And Lydia's young assistant, an anxious girl with ink-stained fingers, was seen crying behind the lemonade stall, claiming she'd found her mistress's ledger missing from the apothecary that very morning. Dora took quiet note of that. A missing ledger was as good as a confession, though not necessarily whose. At 3 o'clock, the crowd gathered for the highlight of the day. The balloon ascent. The inventor bowed extravagantly, promising that his celestial messenger would soar to 300 feet before descending by silk parachute. A marvel of modern engineering and very little sense. Inspector Thorne stood near Dora at the rope line. "What do you think, Mrs. Penhaligon? Will it rise?" "Everything rises when inflated," she said, eyes on the balloon. "The question is, how gracefully it comes down." The man released the cord. The balloon lifted, bright and trembling, its tether swaying like a nervous leash. The villagers gasped as it climbed against the patchy clouds, carrying a small wicker basket that held a floral tribute, an unfortunate coincidence in the circumstances. For a glorious moment it held steady. Then came a sharp, metallic crack, like a gunshot muffled by distance, and the crowd screamed as the balloon pitched violently, shedding silk like torn petticoats. The basket fell, spinning end over end, and struck the ground not 10 yards from the lemonade stall. Silence followed, sudden and enormous. Then a woman cried out. It was Lady Araminta Doveton. Dora and Thorne ran together. The fallen basket had smashed the table of Victoria sponges and, far worse, pinned beneath its wicker and shattered frame was a body. Lady Doveton herself, crumpled in a most undignified posture, her parasol torn and her pearls scattered like surrender. Thorne knelt, checking pulse and breath. Dora touched his shoulder and shook her head. The woman's neck lay at a tragic, unmistakable angle. Around them, the fate dissolved into chaos. Children weeping, men shouting for order, the inventor protesting his innocence at the top of his lungs. "She was nowhere near it," Thorne muttered. "She was standing by the urn." "Until someone called her name," Dora said softly. "I saw her turn." She stepped forward, as if summoned. The inspector rose slowly, looking about the crowd. Summoned by whom? "Perhaps," Dora said, her gaze moving from the ruined balloon to the gas canister hissing quietly beside the table, by whoever cut the rope and tampered with the valve. Thorne exhaled. 3 deaths, 2 warnings, and 1 too many coincidences. 3 women, Dora corrected, each the subject of ridicule, each told something she was not supposed to know. "You believe this was no accident?" "I believe," she said, eyes narrowing, "that the sky has learned to aim." That evening, thunder returned like an encore. Dora stood by her window watching lightning fret across the moor. The fete had ended in pandemonium. The balloon man was in custody, but even Thorne doubted his guilt. She loosened her hair and stared at her reflection. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her figure still gracious beneath her dressing gown. She was, she knew, a woman past the age when men write sonnets, but not past the age when truth can quicken the pulse. Her diary lay open on the desk. She wrote, Lady Doveton dead. Third warning fulfilled. Balloon sabotaged. The ledger missing. Lydia's assistant fled before evening. Inspector Thorne troubled. Rightly so. There is pattern in the air, like embroidery seen from the wrong side. Threads tangled, but the shape is there if one looks long enough. She dipped her pen once more. And he looks at me differently now. Not as a witness. Perhaps as an ally. Or perhaps as someone whose sky he does not wish to see fall. Chapter 5. Threads of Guilt. The morning after the fete dawned pale and hollow, like a room that had been emptied overnight. The bunting still hung across the square, limp and bedraggled. A few curls of scorched silk from the ruined balloon lay tangled in the grass near the vicarage gate. Little Hatherley, which had so valiantly pretended to be merry, was now hung over with fear. Mrs. Penhaligon awoke to find a note pushed beneath her door. The handwriting was small, almost secretarial. If you value the inspector's safety, tell him to leave the village before sunset. The sky is not done falling. No signature, no clue. Just the faintest smudge of chalk dust at one edge. Dora read it twice, folded it carefully and went to dress. Inspector Edmund Thorne was already at the church by the time she arrived. He stood near the tower wall, coat collar turned up against the wind, studying the spot where Miss Featherby had met her end. His hat was off, and the morning light showed the grey that had begun to infiltrate his dark hair, the firm line of his jaw, and a faint white scar that bisected his right eyebrow. A relic, Dora suspected, of some former recklessness. He looked older than his 45 years when he was thinking, younger when he smiled, which was rarely, but today he looked neither, only weary. "You've had a message," Dora said by way of greeting, holding out the folded note. "Or perhaps we both have a message." He read it, eyes narrowing slightly. Anonymous threats, the poetry of cowards. "Even cowards can be accurate," Dora said softly. "You should take care." He gave a faint smile. "Mrs. Penhaligon, I was nearly knifed in Whitechapel, shot at in Limehouse, and once mistaken for a blackmailer in Paris. A Devonshire warning written on good stationery will hardly unnerve me." She tilted her head, interested. "Whitechapel? That sounds like history." "A case from 15 years ago," he said. "A woman found dead in an alley, no kin, no witnesses. It took me months to find her name. I solved it, if you can call it that, but it left a taste. My superiors thought me too thorough for my own good." "And so they sent you to the quiet countryside," Dora said, "to recover your health or your faith?" "Perhaps both," Thorne said. "I broke an engagement as well." Dora glanced at him. "And did she forgive you?" "She married a solicitor in Brighton," he said dryly. "I imagine she's forgiven everything by now." "You have that look," she said, "of a man who sees too much and rests too little." He gave a small, genuine laugh. "And you, Mrs. Penhaligon, have the look of a woman who sees what others miss and prefers them not to notice it." Dora smiled but said nothing. They walked together through the churchyard, where the grass had begun to sprout small clusters of white mushrooms, nature's quiet mockery of death. "I had the vicar open the vestry again," Thorne said. "Lady Doveton's maid brought something this morning, a small key found in her mistress's reticule. Brass with the initials LC scratched inside." "Lydia Creech," Dora murmured. "Then the three are indeed connected," Thorne nodded. "I've searched the apothecary and Miss Featherby's cottage. No matching lock. But the Doveton estate has a cabinet in the study. Lady Doveton kept her husband's correspondence locked away since his death. I suspect the key fits there. They arranged to visit the manor that afternoon. The Doveton estate, stripped of its mistress's hauteur, felt suddenly vast and hollow. Dust motes hung like unsaid things in the light. Thorne unlocked the cabinet, and they found a neat row of ledgers bound in blue leather. Dora, who had spent half her life reading between lines, turned the pages until she stopped on one entry, written in a bolder hand. Disbursement to Miss L. Creech, 1878, £50 for silence. Another page, Miss P. Featherby, annual stipend to continue under same terms. And finally, at the bottom of the last ledger, M. Doveton, full settlement arranged prior to voyage. Good heavens, Dora breathed. They were being paid off. For what? Thorne said. She read further, tracing with her fingertip. It references a letter mislaid and the child. No name given. Thorne closed the book slowly. This is blackmail. But who was blackmailing whom? Dora looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. Lady Doveton's late husband was known for his charitable interests. Perhaps one of them proved too personal. Lydia and Miss Featherby may have known the truth, and someone feared they would speak. Thorne nodded grimly. And now they can't. Yet someone still fears exposure, Dora said. Or there would be no warning about you. They left the manor as the first drops of rain began again, falling with the weary persistence of a habit. Dora lifted her parasol. Thorne walked beside her without one. You should not walk without cover, she said. I've never cared for umbrellas, he replied. They limit the view. Or perhaps, Dora said, you simply enjoy getting wet when a lady is obliged to share hers. He smiled slightly, stepping beneath it. You've caught me out. They paused at the gate, the lane stretching ahead, quiet and glistening. The silence between them was companionable and yet charged, a silence that noticed itself. You should go to London, at least for a few days, Dora said finally. Whoever sent that note means something by it. I've never run from threats, Thorne said, but I'll take care. And you, he turned to her, his voice gentler now, should not walk alone after dark. I've walked through worse, Dora said. Alexandria during a cholera outbreak, Malta under siege of gossip, and one winter in Portsmouth when every widow in the town was after the same captain. Then I pity the captain, he said. He did not deserve pity, Dora replied. He deserved a map. Thorne laughed, the sound soft and unguarded. You are remarkable, Mrs. Penhaligon. And you, she said, are beginning to notice. That night, Dora's diary grew darker. Ledger found. Payments to Featherby and Creech. Secret connected to Doveton family. Threat to the inspector. The child mentioned. Whose? And who now profits from silence? If the sky falls once more, it will not be by chance. She paused, tapping her pen. Then, almost as if confessing to the page, he carries his loneliness like a well-tailored coat. It suits him too well. Chapter 6. The Child in the Shadows. The rain returned with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, battering Little Hatherley until even the geese surrendered to their sheds. The streets glistened, the air smelled of wet slate and wood smoke, and the village, worn thin by curiosity, finally stayed indoors. At Rose Cottage, Dora Penhaligon trimmed the lamp and drew the curtains. The fire hummed in the grate, the teapot muttered on the hob, and the ticking clock sounded like polite company. She had changed since the first days of the inquiry, no longer simply the widow who gardened and read poetry by the fire. At 40, she was handsome in the true sense of the word. Eyes that met one's gaze and stayed, a figure that curved neatly where it ought, and a presence that invited confidence without ever begging for it. She was sitting at her writing desk, her hair unpinned in a tumble of soft gold and silver tones, when a knock startled her from her thoughts. Nellie's voice came through the door. "Beg pardon, ma'am, but the inspector's here. Says it's important." Dora smiled faintly. "It usually is." Inspector Thorne entered, rain-damp and restless. His dark coat steamed faintly by the fire, and his expression was that of a man who had chased a thought through every back alley of his mind and found it waiting for him at the front door. "Forgive the hour," he said. "I couldn't wait till morning." "Then sit, Inspector," Dora said, pouring tea. "I suspect your news won't improve with daylight." He accepted the cup, but his eyes remained fixed on her face, not with boldness, but with the attentive regard of a man who for the first time in years found another mind as quick as his own. "I went back to the ledgers," he said at last. "Lady Doveton's solicitor admitted something off record. There was indeed a child, born out of wedlock before her marriage. She placed it under guardianship, arranged through Lydia Creech. The child was to receive funds in trust, with Miss Featherby overseeing the payments." Dora set down her cup slowly. "And now both women who knew of the arrangement are dead." "Yes." Thorne nodded. "I contacted the solicitor's office, Beeson and Frame. The trust records vanished from the solicitor's files 2 weeks ago after a break-in. Lord Doveton died less than a year ago, correct?" He glanced at Dora, who nodded her head in agreement. Thorne continued. "Lord and Lady Doveton were married almost 15 years ago. That would make the child at least 15, possibly 16. The solicitor said that the so-called trust had been set up before he was hired. The main partner, a Mr. Beeson, was a friend of Lord Doveton, and he had kept the file locked in his desk. But he died several weeks ago. Natural causes, and I did confirm that through his doctor. Unfortunately, the solicitor had never seen the file before it was stolen." "Who would gain from that?" Dora asked. "Someone who wished the child to remain ignorant of their claim," Thorne said. "Or someone afraid of the child's parentage becoming public." Dora rose and crossed to the window, watching rain run down the glass like a signature. Lady Doveton was always theatrical about morality. I doubt she could bear the thought of scandal under her own roof. "True," Thorne said, "but according to her maid and her staff, she was also vain. If the secret could be used to control her, someone did." The blackmail began after her husband's death. Lord Doveton had been married twice before, no children and a widower at 60. The estate is large, and he gained his wealth from his previous marriages. Both had died in childbirth along with the children. He was also a gambler, a man with many secrets. Lady Doveton was only 19 when they married. A merchant's daughter, rather plain. And she was on the lookout for a man who could provide her with a title and a large estate. She found that man in Lord Doveton. She again provided him with a handsome dowry to add to his already large fortune. Thorne glanced down at the fire and continued. "From what I was able to gather from her staff, Lady Doveton would do anything to keep up the pretense of a happy marriage. An illegitimate child was definitely not in her plans. Whoever the mother was, whether she is still living, and where the child is, I found no other records." He looked back at Dora, who was tracing her finger on the window, brow furrowed in thought. "All I could ascertain was that Lydia Creech managed the letters. Featherby handled the money. They must have realised the danger too late." Dora turned back toward him. "I knew Lady Doveton was rather vain, and I thought rather pompous even though she was fairly young. Plain, yes, but always dressed in the latest fashions, and always wore the Doveton jewels at the few events I attended at the manor. Lord Doveton, yes, he was handsome, even in his later years. He did have an eye for the ladies, and Lady Doveton seemed oblivious. But was she really? Now I doubt it. He died 9 months ago after a fall from his horse during a hunt." Dora shivered. "I hate hunting." She looked at Thorne as a thought crossed her mind. "And what of the child? Could he, or she, be here among us?" Thorne hesitated. "That is precisely what worries me." A soft sound interrupted them, a faint scrape against the back window, followed by a shadow that moved where no shadow should. Thorne crossed the room in an instant, drawing his revolver. Dora followed, her heart quickened but steady. He flung open the door to the garden. Rain slanted in, wild and silver. The gate creaked. Nothing but darkness. Then, a flash. A figure running through the hedge, slight, soaked, stumbling. Thorne leapt down the steps and caught the fleeing shape by the wrist. A strangled cry followed, thin and frightened. "Let me go!" "I didn't do nothing." It was a girl, perhaps 16, with a tangle of dark hair and a defiant, shivering face. "Who are you?" Thorne demanded. "Maisie," she gasped. Maisie Creech, Lydia's niece. I had to see her, but they said she was gone. They said... Dora came closer, her shawl pulled tight. "You're Lydia's kin?" "Yes, Ma'am." "She took me in when I was little. Said I was better off here than in London. I ran when the constable came. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Dora asked gently. Maisie hesitated, then whispered, "A man came to the shop before she died. He had a scar on his eyebrow and a voice that sounded like London. She said if anything happened to her, I was to find the lady who writes things in the paper." Dora's breath caught. She meant me. Dora looked closely at Maisie and realised that she had seen the girl only a handful of times at the apothecary, but only in the back room, and never close up. The village was small, but even after 5 years she did not know everyone, and she had never been close to Lydia. Dora gathered her scattered thoughts and focused again on what Maisie had just said. Thorne's jaw tightened. "A scar on the eyebrow?" Maisie nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He lowered his revolver slowly. "Then it seems I have a double." Dora studied him, the line of his brow, the faint scar she had noticed before. A coincidence, perhaps, or something that reached deeper than either of them knew. "Maisie," she said gently, "come inside. You're safe now." An hour later, the girl was dry and fed, curled near the fire like a half-starved cat. Dora watched her with quiet pity. Thorne stood by the mantel, his expression unreadable. "If Lydia told her to find you, she must have known you'd see the truth where others wouldn't." "Or she knew I was too curious to leave it alone," Dora said. "Maisie, did your aunt ever speak of the Dovetons?" "Only that I wasn't to go near the manor," Maisie said sleepily. "She said they'd done enough harm already. Said they ruined her sister, my mother, before I was born." The words fell into the room like stones into a pond. Dora's gaze lifted slowly to Thorne's. "Then you see it," she said softly. "Maisie is the child. The one they paid to keep hidden." Thorne nodded, his expression darkening. "And whoever has been silencing witnesses will come for her next." Dora's voice was low but steady. "Then she will not sleep alone tonight." Thorne's eyes met hers, protective, yes, but also something warmer beneath. "Nor you. I'll stay by the fire." "I've weathered worse storms," she said. "I know," he said, "but I've only just begun to like the way you tell the tale." Dora smiled faintly, and the rain whispered against the windows like the world holding its breath. Her diary entry that night was short. The child is found. Her name is Maisie. The inspector's past and present may yet collide. The danger is near enough to hear the rain. And though I should be afraid, I am not. Perhaps because for the first time since Henry died, I am not alone in the storm. Chapter 7. The Visitor at Midnight. Rain struck the shutters like thrown gravel, and Rose Cottage seemed to shrink beneath it. Dora sat with her sewing untouched on her lap. Inspector Thorne paced before the hearth, eyes on the window. Maisie, exhausted, slept in the chair nearest the fire. When the knock came, it was frantic. 3 sharp blows and 1 that faltered. Thorne was at the door in an instant, revolver drawn. Mrs. Emmett stood there, drenched to the bone, her shawl half slipped from her shoulders. "You must help me," she gasped. "He'll come for her. The girl. He said no one must live who knows." "Who?" Thorne demanded. "The man with the scar," she cried. "He said he'd finish what he started." Thorne pulled her inside. Dora took her arm and guided her to the fire and poured her a small glass of brandy to warm her. The laundress's face was grey with cold and terror. When she spoke again, the words tumbled out in uneven bursts, the glass of brandy trembling in her hands. Mrs. Emmett's story. It began long before the fete, she said. I worked at Doveton Manor from a girl. I knew Lydia Creech and her sister Margaret, the pretty one who was always singing in the still room. When she got herself with child by his lordship, the household went half mad with fear. Lady Doveton swore no one would ever know. The baby was sent to London with the girl's mother, old Mrs. Creech, and money followed every quarter, £200, to keep them decent and silent. Miss Featherby handled the ledgers, Lydia received the drafts. She rubbed her hands together as though scrubbing at the memory. Years passed. Then Lord Doveton died, and Lady Doveton kept the payments herself. Until that man came back. Carter, Thorne said quietly. Mrs. Emmett nodded. He'd been the late Lord's agent once, a clerk and collector. People said he had Doveton blood himself. When he found out about Margaret's child, he laughed, said he'd been cheated of his birthright. He told Lady Doveton the truth would ruin her and demanded the estate for himself. She refused, of course. So he planned another way. She drew a shaking breath. He came to me. Said he needed eyes in the village, someone the ladies trusted. Promised me money for my boy's schooling. Fool that I am? I listened. He told me Miss Featherby was keeping letters that could prove the child's parentage and that I must fetch them. When I tried, she caught me. I pushed her to get free. She fell or slipped. It was uneven there, you know. The lane. She was still alive, but, well, I had to silence her. I swear I meant only to frighten her. At first, anyway. Her voice drifted away, and she looked down, shame and tears mixing in the wrinkles on her face. Dora felt no sympathy for the woman. Dora's voice was gentle but firm. And Lydia Creech? She guessed what had happened. She said she'd tell the police about me and about Carter. After I told him, he made me bring her some tea with strychnine. Her being an apothecary, I just figured she would know, but she drank it right enough. She liked her tea with a lot of sugar, and she never suspected I would. Kill her. I wrote the suicide note. Maisie wasn't in the apothecary, nor was she upstairs. I couldn't find her. When I told Carter Lydia had died, he laughed and said there was only one left to silence, at least just one, before he found Maisie. Lady Doveton, Thorne said. Mrs. Emmett nodded again, tears sliding down her cheeks. He rigged that balloon himself, the one for the fete, said it would be a grand spectacle. When it rose, I saw the cord snap too soon. He called it justice. Her hands trembled. I told him I was finished. He said if I spoke a word, he'd send the same wind for me. And now? Dora asked softly. He knows the girl's here, Mrs. Emmett whispered. Said he'd take her before the month was out. I couldn't bear it. I thought if I came to you, you could stop him. She looked down at the brandy glass in her hands and took a small sip and then a larger sip. The storm groaned outside as though to punctuate her words. Before Thorne could answer, a pane of glass shattered in the back room. Wind roared through the breach. He rushed out, but the garden was empty except for footprints that vanished into the lane. When he returned, Mrs. Emmett sat very still, eyes half closed. You'll protect her? She murmured. You have my word, Thorne said. She managed a faint smile. Then I can rest. Her head fell to one side. The brandy glass slipped from her hand and broke against the hearth. She was gone. Dora knelt beside her, fingers at the pulse. Heart failure? Or poison, she said softly. Fear finished what guilt began. Thorne looked toward the darkened window. And the man she feared still walks free. Chapter 8. Doveton Manor. Rain had turned to thin grey drizzle by the time they reached Doveton Manor the next morning. They had both had a long night. The constable was called, and Mrs. Edwards was taken away. Her face had been peaceful in death. Maisie, upon awakening to the commotion, had hysterics. Dora had to calm her down, give her a sleeping draught, and awaken her maid to watch over her while she lay warmly and still in Dora's bed. Dora and Inspector Thorne decided that once the light came through the window, they would go to Doveton Manor. The constable had provided his subordinate, a young man named Gaines, to watch over Rose Cottage while they were gone. The trap rattled down the lane towards the manor house, only 2 miles away. They could have walked, but the drizzle and mud were a silent deterrent. They spoke little. Both sank into thought. Once they reached the house, Thorne jumped out and helped Dora down, her grey dress sleek and fine in the early morning light. Her hair, covered by a small, neat hat, was curling slightly with the mist. Thorne, taking her hand to help her down, met her green-blue eyes. They looked tired, he thought. The great house stood sullen and shuttered, its marble steps streaked with moss. Thorne knocked forcefully on the large ornate front door, and after a time, Haynes, the butler, opened the door, his hands still buttoning his coat. "I am Inspector Thorne of Scotland Yard. I need to see the documents of Lord and Lady Doveton. Please lead us to their location," he said forcefully. The butler was noticeably nervous, but he gathered himself together and led Thorne and Dora to the library. "I assume, sir, that this is where you can find what you may be looking for." He bowed and left them alone. His steps hurried as he headed towards the servants' area. Inside, they came upon a room full of books and dappled sunlight, which shone through the large mullioned windows. Dora loved a good library, and this one she could live in forever. The library smelled of old paper and roses, fresh roses. Lady Doveton was one who made sure her house was impeccable, and it was, even after her death. Dora could see that the servants kept the rooms spotless. Where to begin? She looked at Thorne, who had already begun to open drawers and review papers. Dora moved among the desks and cabinets with careful hands, lifting ledgers and sorting through packets of letters tied with blue silk. It took over an hour, but the letters proved to be a gold mine of information. "Look," she said at last, spreading a small pile of documents on the table, receipts from Lydia Creech, signed quarterly, and this, Lady Doveton's private memorandum to Miss Featherby. £200 every quarter to Mrs. Agnes Creech for the child's comfort. Continue as per my previous instructions regarding the birth of a child. This will be continued and sent until further notice." Thorne examined the signatures. That's the proof. The payments were genuine and continuous until Lord Doveton's death. After that, Carter must have handled them himself. And when Lady Doveton discovered his embezzlement, he turned murderer, Dora said. "I have lived in this village for 5 years, Dora stated. "I moved here after the death of my husband from cholera in the West Indies. My great-aunt Jane left me Rose Cottage when she died, and I came here. Well, because there was no other place I could think to go." She looked at Thorne, a smudge of ink on her cheek. "Lady Doveton was not overly welcome, as I was a nobody, with a small inheritance and a small pension. I met her and Lord Doveton over the years at the local fêtes. Although we did not become friends, she did invite me to several soirees and dinners. I never heard the name Carter and never saw him in the village. This place has so many secrets." She sighed and returned to her perusal of the papers and documents. They worked until the light began to fade, tracing the web of names through correspondence and bank drafts. Among the papers, Dora found a small locked drawer. Inside lay a miniature portrait of a young woman with fair hair and solemn eyes. "Margaret Creech," Dora murmured. "Maisie's mother." Pinned behind the portrait was a note in Lord Doveton's handwriting. "If ever my sin be revealed, let mercy guide the reckoning. The child is blameless. Margaret Creech, I loved her. My daughter is Maisie. It was dated 16 years ago. Underneath the portrait was a folded document. It looked worn and tattered, like it had been read many times. Dora unfolded it and gasped. Look! Margaret and Lord Doveton were married in London before Maisie was born, and it is dated 1872. That is a year before he married Lady Doveton. Then Maisie is legitimate, Thorne stated firmly. And Lady Doveton did not want it known that Lord Doveton had married a servant and fathered a child prior to their marriage. They were married only 3 months after Maisie's mother died in childbirth. Lord Doveton couldn't have loved Margaret that much. Of course he didn't, though he did marry her, then hid her away. I wonder why. Poor Margaret, dead at 19 and leaving a helpless baby girl. Doveton is going off on his merry way and marrying Lady Doveton, who had thousands of pounds to fill his coffers. Dora's eyes stung. She passed the paper to Thorne, who folded it carefully. We'll take these to the magistrate, he said. With them, the court can appoint you guardian and secure her inheritance. And Carter? She asked. Thorne looked toward the rain-blurred window. He won't rest while there's money or revenge to be had. But now he knows whose side time is on. Chapter 9. The Road to London. London never slept. It merely changed disguises. By the time Dora Penhaligon's carriage reached the city, dusk had softened the soot, and gas lights shimmered like cautious stars above the Thames. Maisie pressed her face to the window in silent wonder. She had not seen her grandmother's city since she fled it months before. Are you frightened? Dora asked. Maisie shook her head. Only of remembering. Then remember the good, Dora said gently. The house in St. Martin's Row, the garden your grandmother tended, and how much she loved you. That's all the past you need. Dora smiled and stared unseeingly out the window as the hustle and bustle of London passed by. She was turning over the fragments of the girl's London childhood in her mind, like pieces of delicate china. Maisie had spoken shyly, almost apologetically, of the small house in St. Martin's Row, where her grandmother kept lace curtains spotless and the kettle always singing. There had been books, a canary, and Sunday walks to the flower market. It was a simple, happy existence, until the old lady's death left the rent unpaid and the neighbours curious. Then came the letter from Aunt Lydia, summoning her to the country. Dora could almost see the brave little figure clutching a carpet bag and boarding the train with more trust than fear. How much courage it must have taken to step from the city's smoke into the green uncertainty of the village, and how fiercely she, Dora, must now protect what innocence remained. The solicitor's papers. At the offices of Chalmers and Gray, Thorne's badge opened doors faster than credentials. Thorne had selected this office as he knew they were forthright and honest. The clerk ushered them through corridors that smelled of wax and old ledgers until they stood before Mr. Chalmers himself, a meticulous man whose spectacles seemed to weigh more than his conscience. Mrs. Penhaligon, he began, Inspector Thorne. I have reviewed the packet you sent, Lady Doveton's memorandum, the receipts from Miss Featherby, and Miss Creech's private diary. Quite an archive. An inheritance of sorrow, Dora said, but we must make it right. Chalmers cleared his throat. Under the law, the Doveton estate, being unentailed, may be claimed by a surviving child of Lord Doveton should proof of paternity exist. These letters, he lifted the delicate paper carefully, are sufficient proof of acknowledgement and legitimacy. Miss Maisie Creech, therefore, may petition the Chancery Court for recognition as natural heir to the unentailed assets. Thorne leaned forward. What value are we speaking of? The manor itself, an annuity from mineral holdings in Derbyshire, and several London investments, Chalmers said, roughly £100,000. Dora caught her breath. Good heavens. Yes, Chalmers said dryly. Good heavens indeed. Enough to inspire greed and murder. Then it was never about £200 a quarter, Thorne murmured. Carter wanted everything. Carter? Chalmers repeated sharply. Thorne's expression hardened. Augustus Carter, Lord Doveton's bastard son by a housemaid. He handled these private payments as agent and collector. When the old lord died, he found he could forge letters, threaten witnesses, and extort the widow. When she refused, he eliminated anyone who could expose him. Chalmers paled. You're certain? I've found correspondence from the East India Company listing him as supercargo aboard the Celeste until 1889. He returned last year under the name A. Cartwright, opened an import business on the Thames, and vanished again after the fate. He's not dead, only waiting. Maisie shrank closer to Dora, who placed an arm around her. Then we must make her safety legal as well as moral, Dora said firmly. She cannot be returned to London lodging houses while that man lives. Indeed not, Chalmers said. If you will both sign here, Mrs. Penhaligon shall be appointed guardian and trustee of the child and her estate until her majority. The papers will be lodged with the Court of Chancery for confirmation. Dora took the pen. The nib trembled only slightly as she wrote her name, Isadora Penhaligon. Underneath, in careful script, Maisie Creech, ward. Thorne added his signature as witness. For a moment none of them spoke. Then Maisie whispered, Does that mean I belong with you now? Dora bent and kissed her hair. It means I'm responsible for keeping you safe. And loved. Both belong together. The Inspector's Hunt. Later, while Dora and Maisie rested at the modest Bloomsbury Hotel, Thorne crossed the river to the docks. Fog clung to the masts like ghosts reluctant to leave. He found what he'd expected, a ledger at the harbour office recording the arrival and departure of the Maria Celeste, bound for Lisbon, and the name A. Cartwright among the passengers. A dock worker remembered him. Tall gent with a limp and a scar. Paid cash for a private cabin. Said he was heading back to Lisbon for a time. Business? By the look of him, I thought maybe dirty business. Thorne paid the man a shilling and stood looking over the black water. Claim it you might, he murmured, but not while I'm breathing. He returned to the hotel near dawn. Dora sat by the fire, reading one of Maisie's primers by lamplight. You found him, she said without question. I found his trail, Thorne answered. He's gone to ground for now. But he'll surface when the court names Maisie heiress. He'll want to challenge it. Then he'll find the same welcome as last time, she said quietly. Thorne smiled faintly. You're learning the detective's art, Mrs. Penhaligon. I prefer to call it vigilance. Whatever the name, he said. I'm grateful for the company. Back at Rose Cottage. Weeks later, Rose Cottage looked itself again, lamps bright, hearth warm, and the scent of apples from the orchard. Maisie's laughter filled the rooms that had once known only solitude. Thorne stood at the gate one evening, hat in hand. I've been recalled to Exeter, he said, but the London office has agreed to forward any word of Carter. I'll return if I'm needed. You will be, Dora said with the smallest of smiles. Men like Carter never vanish. They simply change clocks. He looked at her a moment longer than courtesy required. Then until the next hour strikes. She watched him walk down the lane, his silhouette swallowed by twilight. Inside, Maisie called from the kitchen asking about supper. Coming, my dear, Dora said. She turned once more toward the empty lane. And hurry back, Inspector. The sky may yet fall again. Epilogue. The Watchmaker's Gift. A month later, a parcel arrived by post. Inside lay a pocket watch stopped at 11:37 and a note in an elegant hand. Time keeps its debts. Lisbon is lovely this time of year. See, Dora read it once and placed it on the mantel beside the ticking clock that never stopped. He is alive, she wrote in her diary that night. And he knows we are as well. So be it. The story is not over, and time, it seems, has chosen its allies. In Little Hatherley, the sky has fallen. But in Ashcombe Hollow, time has stopped. Coming soon, Book 2 of the Dora Penhaligon, Mysteries, The Clockmaker's Secret. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this story. Please subscribe to the channel for more books, music, Bible studies, and inspirational content. eBook versions of the Dora Penhaligon Mysteries will soon be available for download. Everlasting Near by Leslie Knox.